I hope that you will allow me to join you again in the future. With that, Egwene withdrew, letting herself smile broadly as she nodded to Farana's sturdy, bow-legged warder standing guard just inside the balcony. Her smile lasted right up until she left the white sector of the tower and found Katarine waiting in the hallway. The red was not one of the two assigned to Egwene earlier in the day, and talk about the tower said that Elida was relying on Katarine more and more now that her keeper had vanished on a mysterious mission. Katarine's sharp face bore a smile of its own. That was not a good sign. Here, the woman said, offering a wooden cup holding a clear liquid. It was time for Egwene's afternoon dose of forkroot. Egwene grimaced, but took the cup and drank the contents. She wiped her mouth with her handkerchief, then began to walk down the hallway. And where are you going? Katarine asked. The smugness in her tone made Egwene hesitate. Egwene turned, frowning. My next lesson. You will have no further lessons, Katarine said. At least, not of the kind you have been receiving. All agree that your skill with weaves is impressive for a novice. Egwene frowned. Were they going to raise her to accepted again? She doubted that Elida would allow her any more freedom, and she rarely spent any time in her quarters, so the extra space would be unimportant. No, Katarine said, toying idly with the fringe on her shawl. What you need to learn, it has been decided, is humility. The Amerlin has heard of your foolish refusal to curtsy to sisters. In her opinion, it's the last symbol of your defiant nature, and so you are to receive a new form of instruction. Egwene felt a moment of fear. What kind of instruction? She said, keeping her voice even. Chores and work, Katarine said. I already do chores just like the novices. You mistake me, Katarine said. From now on, all you will do is chores. You are to report to the kitchens immediately. You will spend every afternoon working there. In the evenings, you will scrub floors. In the mornings, you will report to the grounds master and work in the gardens. This will be your life, those same 3 activities every day, 5 hours of each one, until you give up your
Hey,
foolish
Christopher,
pride
how
and
you
learn to
doing?
curtsy to your betters.
Just smoking some of
It
what
was
I
an end
grew
to Egwene's
so I can get a
freedom,
good
what
bud out
little
for
she
you.
had. There was glee in Katarine's eyes. Ah, so you understand, Katarine said. No more visiting sisters in their quarters, wasting their time as you practice weaves that you have already mastered. No more laziness. Now you will work instead. What think you of that? It wasn't the difficulty of the work that worried Egwene. She didn't mind the chores she did each day. It was the lack of contact with other sisters that would ruin her. How would she mend the White Tower?
About to
Light. It was a
roll
disaster.
a joint.
She gritted her teeth and forced down her emotion. She met Katarine's eyes, saying, Very well, let us go. Katarine blinked. She'd obviously expected a tantrum, or at least a fight. But this was not the time. Egwene turned her step toward the kitchens, leaving the quarters of the Whites behind. She couldn't let them know how effective this punishment was. She forced down her panic as she walked, the cavernous hallways of the inner tower lined with bracketed lamps, long and sinuous, like
Bonsoir, Chris. J'espère que tu vas bien.
sinuous, like the heads of serpents spouting tiny flames up toward the stone ceiling. She could deal with this. She would deal with this. They would not break her. Perhaps she should work for a few days, then pretend that she'd been humbled. Should she give the curtsy Elida demanded? It was a simple thing, really. One curtsy and she could go back to her more important duties. No, she thought. No, that would not be the end of it. I'd lose the moment I gave that first curtsy. Giving in would prove to Elida that Egwene could be broken. Curtsying would begin a descent into destruction. Soon, Elida would decide that Egwene needed to start using honorifics for the Aes Sedai. The false Amerlin would send Egwene back to work detail, knowing it had been effective before. Would Egwene bend there too? How long before any credibility she had ended up forgotten, trampled into the tiles of the tower hallways? She could not bend. The beatings had not changed her behavior. Work detail must not change her either. 3 hours of working in the kitchens did little to improve her mood. Laras, the hefty mistress of kitchens, had set Egwene at scrubbing out one of the oven-like fireplaces. It was dirty, grimy work, not conducive to thinking. Not that there were many ways out of her situation. Egwene knelt back on her heels, raising an arm and wiping her brow. The arm came away smeared with soot. Egwene sighed softly, her mouth and nose protected by a damp cloth to keep her from breathing too much ash. Her breath was hot and stuffy against her face, and her skin was sticky with sweat. The drops that fell from her face were stained with black soot. Through the cloth she could smell the dull, crusty scent of ash that had been burned over and over and over again. The fireplace was a large, square construction of burned red bricks. It was open on both sides, and more than large enough to crawl into, which was exactly what Egwene had to do. Dark crusts built up on the inside of the flue and chimney, and they needed to be scrubbed free lest they clog the chimney or break free and fall into the food. Outside in the dining room, Egwene could hear Katarine and Lyrene chatting and laughing with each other. The Reds periodically poked heads in to check on her, but her real supervisor was Laras, who was scrubbing pots on the other side of the room. Egwene had changed into a work dress for the duty. While it had once been white, it had been repeatedly used by novices cleaning the fireplaces, and the soot had been ground into the fibers. Patches of gray stained the cloth, like shadows. She rubbed the small of her back, got back on her hands and knees, and crawled farther into the fireplace. Using a small wooden scrape, she worked clumps of ash free from seams between the bricks, then gathered it up and deposited it in brass buckets, the rims of which were powdered white and gray with ash. Her first task had been to dig out all of the loose soot and pile it into the buckets. Her hands were so blackened from the work, she worried that the most furious scrubbing wouldn't get them clean. Her knees ached, and they seemed a strange counterpart to her backside, which still stung from her regular morning beating. She continued, scratching with her scrape at a blackened section of brick, dimly lit by the lantern she'd left burning in a corner inside the fireplace. She itched to use the one power, but the Reds outside would sense her channeling, and she'd discovered that her afternoon dose of forkroot had been uncharacteristically strong, leaving her unable to channel as much as a trickle. In fact, it had been strong enough to leave her drowsy, which made the work even harder. Was this to be her life? Trapped inside a fireplace, scrubbing at bricks nobody saw, locked away from the world? She couldn't stand up to Elida if everyone forgot about her. She coughed quietly, the sound echoing against the inside of the fireplace. She needed a plan. Her only recourse seemed to be to use the sisters who were trying to root out the Black Ajah. But how to visit them? Without being trained by sisters, she had no way to escape her red handlers by entering the domains of other Ajahs. Could she sneak away somehow while doing labor? If her absence were discovered, she'd probably end up in an even worse situation. Let her life be dominated by this menial labor. The last battle was approaching. The Dragon Reborn ran free, and the Amerlin Seek was on her hands and knees cleaning fireplaces. She gritted her teeth, scrubbing furiously. The soot had been baked on for so long that it formed a glossy black patina on the stone. She'd never get it all off. She just needed to make sure it was clean enough that none would break free. Reflected in that glossy patina, she saw a shadow move across the opening of the far side of the fireplace. Egwene immediately reached for the source, but of course she found nothing. Not with forkroot clouding her mind. But there was definitely someone outside the fireplace, crouching down, moving quietly. Egwene gripped the scrape in one hand, slowly reaching down with the other to grab the brush she'd been using to scoop up ash. Then she spun. Laras froze, peeking into the fireplace. The mistress of kitchens wore a large white apron, stained with a few soot marks itself. Her pudgy round face had seen its share of winters. Her hair was starting to gray, and lines creased the sides of her eyes. Leaning over as she was, her jowls formed a second, third, and fourth chin, and she gripped the side of the fireplace opening with a thick-fingered hand. Egwene relaxed. Why had she been so certain that someone had been sneaking up on her? It was just Laras coming to check on her. Yet why had the woman moved so silently? Laras glanced to the side, eyes narrowing. Then she raised a finger to her lips. Egwene felt herself tense again. What was going on? Laras backed out of the fireplace, waiting for Egwene to follow. The mistress of kitchens moved on light feet, far quieter than Egwene would have thought possible. Assistant cooks and scullions clanged away in other parts of the kitchen, but none were directly visible. Egwene crept free of the fireplace, tucking the scrape into her belt and wiping her hands on her dress. She pulled the cloth free from her face, breathing sweet, soot-free air. She took a deep breath and received a harsh glare from Laras, followed by another finger to the lips. Egwene nodded, following Laras through the kitchens. In a few moments, she and Egwene stood in a pantry, thick with the scent of dried grains and aging cheeses. The tiles gave way to more durable brickwork here. Laras shoved aside a few sacks, then pulled open a piece of the floor. It was a wooden trapdoor, capped with shaved brickwork on the top to make it seem part of the floor. It revealed a small rock-walled chamber underneath the pantry, large enough to hold a person, though a tall man would be cramped. "You wait here until night," Laras said in a low voice. "I can't get you out right now, not with the tower fluttery as a yard full of hens when the fox is about. But the garbage goes out late at night, and I'll hide you among the girls who unload it. A dock worker will take you to a small boat and row you across the river. I have some friends among the guard. They'll turn the other way. Once you reach the other side, it's up to you what you do. I'd advise against going back to those fools who made you their puppet. Find some place to lie low until this all blows
Hey,
over.
Nip Blash, how you
And come
doing?
back and see if whoever's in charge will take you in. Isn't likely it will be Elida the way things are going." Egwene blinked in surprise. "Well," the heavy-set woman said, "in you go." No time for jabbering," Laras said, as if she weren't the one doing all of the talking. She was obviously nervous, the way she kept glancing about and tapping her foot. But she'd obviously also done this sort of thing before. Why was the simple cook in the White Tower so skilled at sneaking? So handy with a plan to get Egwene out of the fortified and besieged city? And why did she have a bolt hole in the kitchens in the first place? Light. How had she created it? "Don't worry about me," Laras said, eyeing Egwene. "I can handle myself. I'll keep all of the kitchen servants away from where you were working. Those Aes Sedai only check on you every half hour.
Hell yeah.
And since they
Not
just
much
checked
about
the
to
it will be a
smoke
while
a
before
joint,
they
like a
look
couple
in.
joints I just rolled up.
When they do check, I can plead ignorance, and everyone will assume you slipped out of the kitchens. We'll soon have you out of the city, and nobody will be the wiser." "Yes," Egwene said, finally finding her tongue. "But why?" She had assumed that after helping Min and Swan, Laras wouldn't be
Get
eager
my
to help
rolling
another
tray
fugitive.
put away.
Laras looked back at her. In the woman's eyes, a determination as hard as any Aes Sedai's. Egwene certainly had overlooked this woman. Who was she, really? "I won't be a party to the breaking of a girl's spirit," Laras said sternly. "Those beatings are shameful. Fool Aes Sedai. I've served loyally these years, I have, but now they've told me that you're to be worked as hard as I can push you indefinitely. Well, I can see when a girl has moved away from being instructed and into being beaten down. I won't have it. Not in my kitchens. Like burn Elida for thinking she could do such a thing. Execute you or make you a novice, I don't care, but this breaking is unacceptable. The woman stood, setting hands on hips, a puff of flour rising from her apron. Oddly, Egwene found herself considering the offer. She denied Swan's offer to save her.
I just got done,
Now she would return to the rebel camp, having
where I
freed
just got done
herself.
harvesting, pretty much.
That would be far superior to being rescued. She could get away from all this, away from the beatings, away from the drudgery. To do what? To sit on the outside and watch the tower collapse? No, she said to Laras. Your offer is very kind, but I can't take it. I'm sorry. Laras frowned. Now you listen, Laras, Egwene interrupted. One does not take that tone with an Aes Sedai, no matter that one is the mistress of kitchens. Laras hesitated. Fool girl, you ain't Aes Sedai. Accept it or not. I still can't go. Unless
Well, I
you're
also got
stuffing me into that hole yourself. Gagging and tying me to keep
my
me from
smaller
falling
tray.
out,
It's like a
followed
travel
by
tray. It's
escorting me across the river in
my
person,
White Walker
then I
tray.
suggest letting me return to my work. But why? Because, Egwene said, glancing back at the fireplace. Someone has to fight her. You can't fight like this, Laras said. Each day is a battle, Egwene said. Each day I refuse to bend means something. Even if Elaida and her Reds are the only ones who know it, that's something. A small something, but more than I could do from the outside. Come, I've still got 2 hours of work left. She turned and began to walk back toward the fireplace. A reluctant
One second, I'll be right back.
on her hidden chamber, then joined her. The woman made much more noise now as she walked, brushing against counters, her footfalls sounding on the bricks. Curious how she'd been able to be so quiet when she wanted to. A flash of red cloth, like the blood of a dead rabbit in the snow, moved through the kitchens. Egwene froze as Katarine, wearing a dress with crimson skirts and yellow trim, spotted her. The Red's mouth was thin-lipped, her eyes narrow. Had she seen Egwene and Laras walk off? Laras froze. I see now what I was doing wrong, Egwene quickly said to the mistress of kitchens, eyeing a second hearth, which lay near where they had been standing in the pantry. Thank you for showing it to me. I'll be more careful now. See that you are, Laras said, shaking out of her shock. Otherwise you'll see what a real punishment is like. Not those half-hearted paddlings the mistress of novices gives. Now back to work with you. Egwene nodded, hurrying back toward the fireplace. Katarine held up a hand to forestall her. Egwene's heart.
Yeah, I have a couple from Hippie Butler too. I'm not sure what happened with them either.
Katarine said.
I used to get a monthly box from them.
But the novice attend her tonight at dinner. I told the Amelin that
I got
would hardly break someone's
a couple of those little
spirit.
green discs with
I guess you ought to give
with
him
the
a
hip
first chance to
wrapped
prove
around
your
it.
ability, child. Egwene glanced down at her blackened hands. and
Cause I
slowly
got
Go, run.
regular box for a while. Then
Wash
I
off
ended
your
up getting
fingers. The Amelin will not be kept waiting. Washing
the
up
dab
proved
box.
to be nearly as difficult as cleaning the fireplace. The soot had stained her hands much in the way it had the work dress. Egwene
But I
spent
got,
the better part of an hour washing in a tub
like
full of
2 or
lukewarm
3
water, trying
different,
to make herself presentable.
Hippie Butler
Her
trays
fingernails were
laying
ragged
around here
from
somewhere.
scraping the bricks, and it seemed that each time she rinsed her hair, she washed out an entire bucket's worth of soot flakes.
I used to like that one. I'm not sure what
However,
happened
she
to it.
was glad for the chance.
I was
She rarely
getting
had
them there
much
for a
time
while. I
for
was getting them like,
Usually she could not stop for more than
well, when I
6
was
minutes.
working,
As she rinsed and scrubbed in the gray
I was
tile
getting them
sleeping chamber, she considered her next step.
every month.
She
Then when I
turned
stopped
down
working,
the
I started getting them
opportunity.
every
That
2 or
meant
3
she had to
months.
work with Elaida and her
But
Reds,
yeah, then
the only sisters
I
she
could never
saw.
find the place again.
But could they be made to see their errors? She wished she could send the whole lot of them.
And then I got a couple of their dab rigs up in the shelf that
She was
I had to
honored.
retire
She represented
because
all Ajay, including the Red. She
whatchamacallit,
couldn't treat them as Elaida had treated the Blues.
after not that much
They
dabbing,
were antagonistic toward her, but that meant a greater challenge.
they
She seemed to be making some
They clogged
headway
up real
with
quick.
Sylviana. And hadn't Lyrene Dwarelin admitted that Elida had made serious mistakes? Maybe the Reds weren't the only ones she could influence. There were always chance meetings with other sisters in the hallways. If one of them approached her to speak, the Reds
I haven't heard
couldn't
someone
very
mention
well
them
throw
either
her
for
away.
in a little bit
They
too.
would show some decorum, and that would give Egwene a chance to interact a bit with other sisters. But how to treat Elida
Give me
herself?
1 second. I'll be right
Was
back.
it wise to let the false Amaryllis continue to think that Egwene was merely cowed? Or was it time to make a stand? By the end of her bath, Egwene felt a great deal cleaner and a great deal more confident. Her war had taken a serious turn for the worse, but she could still fight. She ran a hurried brush through her wet hair, threw on a new novice dress. My, how good it felt to have the soft, clean fabric on her skin, and left to join her handlers. They escorted her up to the Amelins' chambers. Egwene passed several groups of sisters, and she held herself carefully erect for their benefit. The handlers took her through the red sector of the tower, the tiles on the floor shifting to a pattern of red and charcoal. There were more people walking about here, women in their shawls, servants bearing the flame of Tarvalin on their chests. Never any warders. That always felt strange to Egwene, since they were so common in other parts of the tower. A long climb and a few twists later, they arrived at Elida's quarters. Egwene checked her skirts unconsciously. She had determined during the walk that she needed to approach Elida with silence, just as she had last time. Riling her further would only lead to more restrictions. Egwene would not debase herself, but neither would she go out of her way to insult Elida. Let the woman think as she wished. A servant opened the door, leading Egwene in and into the dining chamber. There she was shocked by what she found. She had assumed she'd attend Elida alone, or maybe with Maidani. Egwene hadn't for a moment considered that the dining room would be filled with women. There were 5, one from each Aja, save the red and the blue, and each woman was a sitter. Yukiri was there, as was Doacine, both from the clandestine hunters of the Black Aja. Firana was there, though she seemed surprised to see Egwene. Had the White not known about this dinner earlier, or had she simply not mentioned it? Rubinda of the Green Aja sat beside Siobhan of the Brown, a sister whom Egwene had been wanting to meet. Siobhan was one of those who supported negotiating with the rebel Aes Sedai, and Egwene hoped to be able to nudge her more toward helping unify the White Tower from within. There wasn't a Red sister at the table, other than Elida. Was that because the Red sitters were all out of the tower? Perhaps Elida thought the room balanced with her there, as she still thought of herself as Red, although she wasn't supposed to. It was a long table, crystal goblets sparkling and reflecting light from the ornate bronze stand lamps running along the walls painted a rusty red-yellow in color. Each woman wore a fine gown in the color of her Aja. The room smelled of succulent meats and steamed carrots. The women chatted, amicable, but forced, tense. They didn't want to be there. Across the room, Doacine nodded to Egwene, almost in respect. It was an indication of something. I'm here because you said that this sort of thing was important, it seemed to say. Elida sat at the head of the table, wearing a red dress with full sleeves, uncut garnets trimming them and the bodice, her face bearing a satisfied smile.
God, I forgot
Servants
what I was
bustled
gonna
back
get.
and forth, pouring wine and bringing food. Why had Elida called a dinner of sitters? Was this an attempt to heal the rifts in the White Tower? Had Egwene misjudged her? Ah, good, Elida said, noticing Egwene. You've finally arrived. Come here, child. Egwene did so, walking through the room, the last few sitters catching notice of her. Some seemed confused, others made curious by her presence. As she walked, Egwene realized something. This one evening could easily undo all that she'd worked for. If the Aes Sedai here saw her subserviently waiting on Elida, Egwene would lose integrity in their eyes. Elida had declared that Egwene was cowed, but Egwene had proven otherwise. If she bent to Elida's will here, even a little, it would be seen as proof. Light burn the woman. Why had she invited so many of the women that Egwene had been working to influence? Was it simple happenstance? Egwene joined the false Amerlin at the head of the table, and a servant handed her a crystal pitcher of glistening red wine. "You are to keep my cup full," Elida said. "Wait there, but don't come too close. I'd rather not have to smell the soot on you from your punishments this afternoon." Egwene clenched her jaw. Smell the soot after an hour of scrubbing? Doubtful. From the side, she could see the satisfaction in Elida's eyes as she sipped her wine. Then Elida turned to Siobhan, who sat in the chair to Elida's right. The brown was a lanky woman, with lobbed arms and an angular face, like a person made of gnarled sticks. Her eyes were thoughtful as she studied her hostess. "Tell me, Siobhan," Elida said, "do you still insist on those foolish talks with the rebels?" Siobhan responded, "The sisters must be given a chance to reconcile." "They've had their chance," Elida said. "Honestly, I expected more of a Brown. You're behaving doggedly without a whit of understanding how the real world works. Why, even Megami agrees with me, and she's a Grey. You know how they are." Siobhan turned away, seeming more disturbed than before. Why did Elida invite them to dinner, if only to insult them and their Ajahs? As Egwene watched, the Red turned her attention to Farana and complained to her about Rubinda, a sitter from the Green who also resisted Elida's efforts to end the talks. As she spoke, she raised her cup to Egwene, tapping it. Elida had barely taken a few sips. Egwene ground her teeth, filling the cup. The others had seen her do labor before. Why, she'd cracked walnuts for Farana. This wouldn't ruin her reputation, not unless Elida forced her to abase herself somehow. But what was the point of this dinner? Elida didn't seem to be making any attempt to bring the Ajahs together. If anything, she was prying those rifts wider, the way she was dismissing those who disagreed with her. Occasionally, she would have Egwene refill her cup, but it never had room for more than a sip or two. Slowly, Egwene began to understand. This dinner wasn't about working with the Ajahs. It was about bullying the sitters into doing as Elida felt they should. And Egwene was simply there to be shown up. This was all about proving to the others how much power Elida had. She could take someone that others had named Amerlin, put a novice dress on her, and send her to penance every day. Egwene felt herself grow angry again. Why could Elida always stir her emotions? Soup bowls were removed and plates of steamed, buttered carrots were brought, a hint of cinnamon striking the air. Egwene had not been given dinner, but she felt too sick to care about eating. No, she thought, steeling herself. I will not end this early like last time. I will endure. I am stronger than Elida. I'm stronger than her madness. The conversation continued, Elida making insulting comments to the others, sometimes with intent, sometimes with apparent unawareness. The others steered the talk away from the rebels and toward the strangely overcast skies. Eventually, Siobhan mentioned a rumor about the Seanchan working with Aiel far to the south. "The Seanchan again," Elida said with a sigh. "You needn't worry about them." "My sources say otherwise, Mother," Siobhan said stiffly. "I think we need to pay close attention to what they are doing. I have had some sisters ask this child about her experience with them, which has been extensive. You should hear the things they do to Aes Sedai." Elida laughed, a tinkling, melodic laugh. "Surely you know how the child is prone to exaggeration." She glanced at Egwene. "Have you been spreading lies for your friend, the fool Althor? What did he tell you to say about these invaders? They are working for him, are they not?" Egwene didn't respond. "Speak," Elida said, gesturing with her cup. "Tell these women you have been speaking lies. Confess or I'll have you in penance again, girl." The penance she would take for not speaking would be better than suffering Elida's rage at contradicting her. Silence was the path to victory. And yet, as Egwene glanced down the long mahogany table, set with bright porcelain and flickering red candles, she saw 5 pairs of eyes studying her. She could see their questions. Egwene had spoken bluntly to them when alone. But would she hold to her assertions now, faced by the most powerful woman in the world? And would she hold Egwene's life in her hands? Egwene the Iron? Or was she just a girl who wanted to pretend? Burn you, Elida, she thought, gritting her teeth, seeing that she had been wrong. Silence wouldn't lead to victory, not in front of these women. You are not going to like how this proceeds. The Seanchan are not working for Rand, Egwene said, and they are a severe danger to the White Tower. I have spread no lies. To say otherwise would be to betray the 3 oaths. You haven't taken the 3 oaths, Elida said sternly, turning toward her. I have, Egwene said. I've held no oath rod, but it isn't the rod that makes my words true. I have spoken the words of the oaths in my heart, and to me they are more dear, for I have nothing forcing me to hold to them. And by that oath holding me, I tell you again, I am a dreamer, and I have dreamed that the Seanchan will attack the White Tower. Elida's eyes flared for a moment, and she gripped her fork until her knuckles whitened. Egwene held her eyes, and finally Elida laughed again. Ah, stubborn as ever, I see. I shall have to tell Katarine that she was right. Penance for your exaggerations, child. These women know I don't speak lies, Egwene said calmly. And each time you insist that I do, you lower yourself in their eyes. Even if you disbelieve my dream, you must admit that the Seanchan are a threat. They leash women who can channel, using them as weapons with a kind of twisted ter'angreal. I have felt the collar on my neck. I still feel it sometimes. In my dreams, my nightmares. The room fell still. You are a foolish child, Elida said, trying to pretend that Egwene was no threat. She should have turned to look at the eyes of the others. If she had, she'd have seen the truth. Well, you have forced my hand. You will kneel before me, child, and beg forgiveness. Right now. Otherwise I will lock you away alone. Is that what you want? Don't think that the beatings will stop, however. You'll still get your daily penance. They'll just be thrown back into your cell after each one. Now kneel and beg forgiveness. The sitters glanced at one another. There was no backing down now. Egwene wished it hadn't come to this, but it had, and Elida had demanded a fight. It was time to give her one. And if I do not bow before you, Egwene asked, meeting the woman's eyes. What then? You will kneel one way or another, Elida growled, embracing the source. You'll use the power on me? Egwene asked calmly. Do you have to resort to that? Have you no authority without channeling? Elida paused. It is within my rights to discipline one who isn't showing proper respect. And so you will make me obey, Egwene said. Is this what you will do to everyone in the tower, Elida? And opposes you, and it is someone displeases you, and you destroy her right to be Aes Sedai. You will have every sister bowing down before you by the end of this. Nonsense. Oh? Egwene asked. And have you told them about your idea for a new oath? An oath brought by everyone, an oath to obey the Amyrlin and support her? I deny it, Egwene said. Deny that you made the statement. Will the oaths let you? Elida froze. If she were black, she could deny it, oath rod or not. But either way, Maidani could substantiate what Egwene had said. It was idle talk, Elida said. Just speculation. Thoughts spoken out loud. There is often truth in speculation, Egwene said. You locked the Dragon Reborn himself in a box. You do the same to me in front of all these witnesses. People call him a tyrant. But you are the one destroying our laws and ruling by fear. Elida's eyes opened wide, her anger visible. She seemed shocked, as if she couldn't understand how she'd gone from disciplining an unruly novice into debating an equal. Egwene saw the woman begin to weave a thread of air. That had to be stopped. A gag of air would end this debate. Go ahead, Egwene said calmly. Use the power to silence me. As Amyrlin, shouldn't you be able to talk an opponent into obedience, rather than resorting to force? Out of the corner of her eye, Egwene saw diminutive Yukiri of the Grey nod at that comment. Elida's eyes flared in anger as she dropped the thread of air. I don't need to rebut a mere novice, Elida snapped. The Amyrlin doesn't explain herself to one such as you. The Amyrlin understands the most complex of creeds and debates, Egwene said, quoting from memory. Yet in the end she is the servant of all, even the lowest of laborers. That had been said by Baladare Arandaila, the first Amyrlin to be raised from the brown Aja. She'd used the words in her last writings before her death. Those writings had been an explanation of her reign and what she had done during the Kavarthan Wars. Arandaila had felt that once a crisis was past, it was the moral duty of her to explain herself to the common people. Sitting beside Elida, Siobhan nodded appreciatively. The quote was somewhat obscure. Egwene blessed Swan's quiet training in the wisdom of the former Amyrlins. Much of what she'd said had come from the secret histories, but there had been a number of nuggets from women such as Baladare as well. What is this nonsense you're sputtering? Elida spat. What did you intend to do with Rand al'Thor once you captured him? Egwene said, ignoring the comment. You're not answering me, Egwene said, nodding to the table of women. But them. Have you explained yourself, Elida? What were your plans? Or will you dodge this question just as you have the others I've asked? Elida's face was turning red, but she calmed herself with some effort. I would have kept him secure and well shielded, here in the tower, until it was time for the last battle. That would have prevented him from causing the suffering and chaos he's created in many nations. It was worth the risk of angering him. As the plow breaks the earth, shall he break the lives of men, and all that was shall be consumed in the fire of his eyes, Egwene said. The trumpets of war shall sound at his footsteps, the ravens feed at his voice, and he shall wear a crown of swords. He frowned, taken aback. The Karaithan cycle, Elida, Egwene said. When you had Rand locked away to be kept secure, had he yet taken Ilion? Had he yet worn what he was to name the Crown of Swords? Well, no. And how did you expect him to fulfill the prophecies if he was hidden away in the White Tower? Egwene said. How was he to cause war as the prophecies say he must? How was he to break the nations and bind them to him? How could he slay his people with the sword of peace, or bind the 9 moons to serve him if he was locked away? Do the prophecies say that he will be unfettered? Do they not speak of the chaos of his passing? How can anything pass at all if he is kept in chains? Your logic is astounding, Elida, Egwene said coldly. At that, Varana smiled slyly. She was probably thinking yet again that Egwene would fit well in the White Aja. Bah, Elida said. You ask meaningless questions. The prophecies would have to have been fulfilled. There was no other way. So you're saying that your attempt to bind him was doomed to fail? No, not at all, Elida said, red-faced again. We shouldn't be bothering with this. It's not for you to decide upon. No, we should be talking about your rebels and what they've done to the White Tower. A good turn of the conversation, an attempt to put Egwene on the defensive. Elida wasn't completely incompetent, just arrogant. I see them trying to heal the rift between us, Egwene said. We can't change what has happened. We can't change what you did to Swan, even if those with me did discover a method of healing her stilling. We can only move forward and try our best to smooth the scars. What are you doing, Elida? Refusing talks? Trying to bully the sitters into withdrawing? Insulting Ajas that are not your own? Doacine of the Yellow gave a quiet murmur of agreement. That drew Elida's eyes, and she fell silent for a moment, as if realizing that she had lost control of the debate. Enough of this. Coward, Egwene said. Elida's eyes flared wide. How dare you? I dare the truth, Elida, Egwene said quietly. You are a coward and a tyrant. I'd name you Dark Friend as well, but I suspect that the Dark One would perhaps be embarrassed to associate with you. Elida screeched, weaving in a flash of power, slamming Egwene back against the wall, toppling the pitcher of wine from her hands. It shattered on a patch of wooden floor beside the rug, throwing a spray of blood-like liquid across the table and half of its occupants, staining the white tablecloth with a smear of red. You name me Dark Friend? Elida screamed. You are the Dark Friend. You and those rebels outside who seek to distract me from doing what must be done. A blast of woven air slammed Egwene against the wall again, and she dropped to the ground, hitting shards of the broken pitcher that sliced open her arms. A dozen switches beat her, ripping her clothing. Blood seeped from her arms, and it began to splash into the air, smirching the wall as Elida beat her. Elida, stop it, Rubinda said, standing, green dress swishing. Are you mad? Elida turned, panting. Do not tempt me, Green. The switches continued to beat Egwene. She bore it silently. With effort, she stood up. She could feel her face and arms swelling already, but she maintained a calm gaze at Elida. Elida, Ferrana yelled, standing. You violate Tower law. You cannot use the power to punish an initiate. I am Tower law, Elida raved. She pointed at the sisters. You mock me. I know you do it, behind my back. You show me what you see me, but I know what you say, what you whisper. You ungrateful fools. After what I've done for you, do you think I'll suffer you forever? Take this one as an example. She spun, pointing at Egwene, then stumbled back in shock to find Egwene calmly watching her. Elida gasped softly, raising a hand to her breast as the switches beat. They could all see the weaves, and they could all see that Egwene did not scream, although her mouth was not gagged with air. Her arms dripped blood, her body was beaten before them, and yet she found no reason to scream. Instead, she quietly blessed the Aiel wise ones for their wisdom. And what, Egwene said evenly, am I to be an example of, Elida? The beating continued. Oh, how it hurt! Tears formed in the corners of Egwene's eyes, but she had felt worse, far worse. She felt it each time she thought of what this woman was doing to the institution she loved. Her true pain was not from the wounds, but from how Elida had acted before the sitters. By the light, Rubinda whispered. I wish I weren't needed here, Elida, Egwene said softly. I wish that the tower had a grand Amyrlin in you. I wish I could step down and accept your rule. I wish you deserved it. I would willingly accept execution if it would mean leaving a competent Amyrlin. The White Tower is more important than I am. Can you say the same? You want execution? Elida bellowed, recovering her tongue. Well, you shall not have it. Death is too good for you, Dark Friend. I shall see you beaten. Everyone shall see you beaten until I am through with you. Only then will you die. She turned to the servants who stood gaping at the sides of the room. Send for soldiers. I want this one cast into the deepest cell this tower can provide. Let it be voiced through the city that Egwene al'Vere is a Dark Friend who has rejected the Amyrlin's grace. Servants ran to do as she demanded. The switches continued to beat, but Egwene was growing numb. She closed her eyes, feeling faint. She had lost much blood from her left arm, which bore the deepest of her gashes. It had come to a head, as she'd feared that it would. She had cast her lot. But she didn't fear for her life. Instead, she feared for the White Tower. As she leaned back against the wall, thoughts fading, she was overcome with sorrow. Her battle from within the tower was at an end, one way or another. Chapter 17. Questions of Control. You should be more careful, Serene said from inside the room. The Amerlin seat. We have much influence with her. Your punishments. We may be able to persuade her to lessen them, if you are helpful. Semirag's sniff of disdain was quite audible to Cadsuane, listening from the hallway outside the interrogation room, sitting in a comfortable log chair. Cadsuane sipped at a cup of warm sweat leaf. The hallway was of simple wood, carpeted with a long maroon and white rug, prism-like lamps on the walls flickering with light. There were several others in the hallway with her. Gaigyan, Arian, Elza, whose turn it was to maintain Semirag's shield. Aside from Cadsuane, each Aes Sedai in the camp took turns. It was too dangerous to risk forcing the duty only on the Aes Sedai of lesser stature, lest they grow weary. The shield had to remain strong. Light only knew what would happen if Semirag got free. Cadsuane sipped her tea, her back to the wall. Althor had insisted that his Aes Sedai be allowed opportunities to interrogate Semirag, instead of just those Cadsuane had chosen. She wasn't certain if this was some attempt at asserting his authority, or if he genuinely thought that they might succeed where she, so far, had failed. Anyway, that was why Serene was doing the questioning today. The Tarabonner White was a thoughtful person, completely unaware that she was one of the most beautiful women to gain the shawl in years. Her nonchalance was not unexpected, as she was of the White Aja, who could often be as oblivious as Browns. Serene also didn't know that Cadsuane was outside, eavesdropping, through the use of a small weave of spirit. It was a simple trick, one often learned by novices. Mixing it with this newly found trick of inverting one's weaves meant that Cadsuane could listen in, without anyone inside knowing that she was there. The Aes Sedai outside saw what she was doing, of course, but none said anything. Even though two of them, Elza and Arian, were among the group of fools who had sworn fealty to the Althor boy, they stepped lightly around her. They knew how she regarded them. Idiot women. At times it seemed that half of her allies were only determined to make her job harder. Serene continued her interrogation inside. Most of the Aes Sedai in the manor had now given questioning a try. Brown, green, white, and yellow, all had failed. Cadsuane herself had yet to address any questions to the Forsaken personally. The other Aes Sedai looked at her as an almost mythic figure, a reputation she had nurtured. She'd stayed away from the White Tower for many decades at a time, ensuring that many would assume she was dead. When she reappeared, it made a stir. She'd gone hunting false dragons, both because it was necessary and because each man she captured added to her reputation with the other Aes Sedai. All her work pointed at these final days. Light blind her if she was going to let that Althor boy ruin it all now. She covered her scowl by taking a sip of her tea. She was slowly losing control, thread by thread. Once, something as dramatic as the squabbles at the White Tower would have drawn her immediate attention, but she couldn't begin to work on that problem. Creation itself was unraveling, and her only way to fight that was to turn all her efforts on Althor. And he resisted her every attempt to aid him. Step by step, he was becoming a man with insides like stone, unmoving and unable to adapt. A statue with no feelings could not face the Dark One. Blasted boy.
Right back.
And now there was Semirog, continuing to defy her. Cadsuane itched to go in and confront the woman, but Maurice had asked the very questions Cadsuane would have, and she had failed. How long would Cadsuane's image remain intact if she proved herself as impotent as the others? Serene began to talk again. The Aes Sedai, you should not treat them so, Serene said, voice calm. Aes Sedai, Semirog responded, chuckling. Don't you feel ashamed using that term to describe yourselves? Like a puppy calling itself a wolf. We may not know everything, I admit, but you know nothing, Semirog replied. You are children playing with your parents' toys. Cadsuane tapped the side of her teacup with her index finger. Again, she was struck by the similarities between herself and Semirog, and again those similarities made her insides itch. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a slender serving woman climb the steps, carrying a plate of beans and steamed radishes for Semirog's midday meal. Time already? Serene had been interrogating the Forsaken for 3 hours, and she'd been talked neatly in circles the entire time. The serving woman approached, and Cadsuane waved for her to enter. A moment later, the tray crashed to the floor. At the sound, Cadsuane leaped to her feet, embracing Saida, quite nearly rushing into the room. Semirog's voice made Cadsuane hesitate. I will not eat that, the Forsaken said, in control, as always. I have grown tired of your swill. You will bring me something appropriate. If we do, Serene's voice said, obviously snatching for any advantage. Will you answer our questions? Perhaps, Semirog replied. We shall see if it fits my mood. There was silence. Cadsuane glanced at the other women in the hall, all of whom had leaped to their feet at the sound, although they couldn't hear the voices. She motioned them to sit down. Go and fetch her something else, Serene said, speaking inside the room to the serving woman, and send someone to clean this up. The door opened, then shut quickly as the servant hurried away. Serene continued. This next question, it will determine if you actually get to eat that meal or not. Despite the firm voice, Cadsuane could hear a quickness to Serene's words. The sudden drop of the tray of food had startled her. They were also jumpy around the Forsaken. They weren't deferential, but they did treat Semirog with a measure of respect. How could they not? She was a legend. One did not enter the presence of such a creature, one of the most evil beings ever to live, and not feel at least a measure of awe. Measure of awe. That's our mistake, Cadsuane whispered. She blinked, then turned and opened the door into the room. Semirog stood in the center of the small chamber. She had been retied in air, the weaves likely woven as she dropped her tray. The brass platter lay discarded, the beans soaking juice into the aged wooden boards. This room had no window. It had been a storage chamber at one point, converted into a cell to hold the Forsaken. Serene, dark hair and beaded braids, beautiful face, surprised at the intrusion, sat in a chair before Semirog. Her warder, Vitalian, broad-shouldered and ashen-faced, stood in the corner. Semirog's head was not bound, and her eyes flicked toward Cadsuane. Cadsuane had committed herself. She had to confront the woman now. Fortunately, what she planned didn't require much delicacy. It all came back to a single question. How would Cadsuane break herself? The solution was easy, now that it occurred to her. Ah, Cadsuane said with a no-nonsense attitude. I see that the child has refused her meal. Serene, release your weaves. Semirog raised her eyebrows and opened her mouth to scoff. But as Serene released her weaves of air, Cadsuane grabbed Semirog by the hair and, with a casual sweep of her foot, knocked the woman's legs out from beneath her, dropping her to the floor. Perhaps she could have used the power, but it felt right to use her hands for this. She prepared a few weaves, though she probably wouldn't need them. Semirog, though tall, was a woman of willowy build. Herself had always been more stout than she was slim. Plus, the Forsaken seemed utterly dumbfounded at how she was being treated. Cadsuane knelt down with one knee on the woman's back, then shoved her face forward into the spilled food. "Eat," she said. "I don't approve of wasted food, child, particularly during these times." Semirog sputtered, releasing a few phrases that Cadsuane could only assume were oaths, though she didn't recognize any of them. The meanings were likely lost in time. Soon the oaths subsided, and Semirog grew still. She didn't fight back. Cadsuane wouldn't have either. That would only hurt her image. Semirog's power as a captive came from the fear and respect that the Aes Sedai gave her. Cadsuane needed to change that. "Your chair, please," she said to Sarene. The wight stood, looking shocked. They had tried all measure of torture available to them under Althor's requirements, but each of those had betrayed esteem. They were treating
Cheers, Chris.
Semirog as a
About to do a
dangerous
dab.
force and a worthy enemy. That would only bolster her ego. "Are you going to eat?" Cadsuane asked. "I will kill you," Semirog said calmly. "Before all of the others. I will make them listen to you." "I see." "Sarene, go tell the three sisters outside to come in." Cadsuane paused, thoughtful. "Also, I saw some more cleaning rooms on the other side of the hallway. Fetch them for me as well." Sarene nodded, rushing from the room. Cadsuane sat in the chair, then wove threads of air and picked Semirog up. Elza and Arian glanced into the room, looking very curious. Then they entered, Sarene following. A few moments later, Daigyan entered with 5 servants, 3 Damani women in aprons, 1 spindly man, his fingers brown with stain from recoating logs, and a single serving boy. Excellent. Cadsuane used her thread to turn Semirog around across her knee, and then she proceeded to spank the Forsaken. Semirog cried at first. Then she began to cry. Then she began to sputter out. Cadsuane continued, her hand beginning to hurt. Semirog's threats turned to howls of outrage and pain. The serving girl with the food returned in the middle, adding even more to Semirog's shame. The Aes Sedai watched with slight joy. Cadsuane said after a few moments, breaking into one of Semirog's howls of pain. "Will you eat?" "I'll find everyone you've ever loved," the Forsaken said, tears in her eyes. "I'll feed them to each other while you watch. Cadsuane tisked and began again. The crowd in the room watched in amazed silence. Semirog began to cry, not from the pain, but from the humiliation. That was the key. Semirog could not be defeated by or by persuasion, but destroying her image, that would be more terrible in her mind than any other punishment, just as it would have been for Cadsuane. Cadsuane stilled her hand after a few more minutes, releasing the weaves that held Semirog motionless. "Will you eat?" she asked. Cadsuane raised her hand, and Semirog practically leaped off of her lap and scrambled onto the floor, eating the beans. "She is a person," Cadsuane said, looking at the others. "Just a person, like any of us. She has secrets, but any young boy can have a secret that he refuses to tell. Remember that." Cadsuane stood and walked to the door. She hesitated beside Sarene, who watched with fascination as the Forsaken took beans off of the floor. "You may want to begin carrying a hairbrush with you," Cadsuane added. "That can be quite hard on your hands." Sarene smiled. "Yes, Cadsuane Sedai." Now, Cadsuane thought, leaving the room, what to do about Althor.
"My lord," Grady said, rubbing his weathered face, "I don't think you understand. Then explain it to me, Perrin said. He stood on a hillside looking down over the huge gathering of refugees and soldiers. Mismatched tents of many different designs, tan, single-peaked Aiel structures, colorful large Kyrianan ones, two-tipped tents of basic design, sprang up as the people prepared for the night. The Shaido Aiel, as hoped, had not given chase. They had let Perrin's army withdraw, though his scouts said that they had now moved in to investigate the city. Either way, it meant Perrin had time. Time to rest, time to move away. Time, he'd hoped, to use gateways to transport away most of these refugees. Light, but it was a big group. Thousands upon thousands of people. A nightmare to coordinate and administer to. His last few days had been filled with an endless stream of complaints, objections, judgments, and papers. Where did Bolwer find so much paper? It seemed to satisfy many of the people who came to Perrin. Judgments and settlements of disputes seemed so much more official to them when a piece of paper outlined them. Bolwer said Perrin would need a seal. The work had been distracting, which was good, but Perrin knew he couldn't push aside his problems for long. Rand pulled him northward. Perrin had to march for the last battle. Nothing else mattered. And yet that very single-mindedness in him, ignoring everything but his objective, had been the source of much trouble during his hunt for Fail. He had to find a balance somehow. He needed to decide for himself if he wanted to lead these people. Peace with the wolf inside himself, the beast that raged when he went into battle. But before he could do any of that, he needed to get the refugees home. That was proving a problem. You've had time to rest now, Grady, Perrin said. The fatigue is only one part of it, my lord, Grady said. Though honestly, I still feel as if I could sleep a week's time. He did look tired. Grady was a stalwart man, with the face of a farmer and the temperament of one too. Perrin would trust this man to do his duty before most lords he'd known. But Grady could be pushed only so far. What did it do to a man to have to channel so much? Grady had bags beneath his eyes, and his face was pale despite his tanned skin. Though he was still a young man, he'd started to go gray. Light, but I use this man too hard, Perrin thought. Him and Nialt both. That had been another effect of Perrin's single-mindedness, as he was beginning to see. What he'd done to Aram, how he'd allowed those around him to go without leadership. I have to fix this. I have to find a way to deal with it all. If he didn't, he might not get to the last battle. Here's the thing, my lord. Grady rubbed his chin again, surveying the camp. The various contingents, Mayenners, Alejandro's guard, the Two Rivers men, the Aiel, the refugees from various cities, all camped separately in their own rings. There are some 100,000 people who need to get home. The ones that will leave anyway. Many say they feel safer here, with you. They can give over wanting that, Perrin said. They belong with their families. And the ones whose families are in Seanchan lands? Grady shrugged. Before the invaders came, many of these people would be happy to return. But now, well, they keep talking about staying where there's food and protection. We can still send the ones who want to go, Perrin said. We'll travel lighter without them. Grady shook his head. That's the thing, my lord. Your man Bolwer, he gave us a count. I can make a gateway big enough for about 2 men to walk through at once. If you figure them taking 1 second to go through, well, it would take hours and hours to send them all. I don't know the number, but he claimed it would be days' worth of work. And he said that his estimates were probably too optimistic. My lord, I could barely keep a gateway open an hour with how tired I am. Perrin gritted his teeth. He'd have to get those numbers from Bolwer himself, but he had a sinking feeling that Bolwer would be right. We'll keep marching then, Perrin said. Moving north. Each day we'll have you and Nield make gateways and return some of the people to their homes. But don't tire yourselves. Grady nodded, eyes hollow from fatigue. Perhaps it will be best to wait a few more days before starting the process. Perrin nodded a dismissal to the dedicated, and Grady jogged back down into camp. Perrin remained on the hillside, inspecting the various sections of the camp as the people prepared for the evening meal. The wagons sat at the center of the camp, laden with food that, he feared, would run out before he could reach Andor. Or should he go around to Kyrian? That was where he had last seen Rand, though his visions of the man made it seem he wasn't in either country. He doubted the Queen of Andor would welcome him with open arms after the rumors about him and that blasted Red Eagle banner. He left that problem alone for the moment. The camp seemed to be settling in. Each ring of tents sent representatives to the central food depot to claim their evening rations. Each group was in charge of its own meals. Perrin just oversaw the distribution of materials. He made out the quartermaster, a Kyrianan named Bavin Rockshaw, standing on the back of a wagon, dealing with each representative in turn. Satisfied with his inspection, Perrin walked down into the camp, passing through the Kyrianan tents on the way to his own tents, which were with the Two Rivers men. He took his enhanced senses for granted now. They had come along with the yellowing of his eyes. Most people around him didn't seem to notice those anymore, but he was starkly reminded of the contrast when he met anyone new. Many of the Kyrianan refugees, for instance, paused in their labors, setting up tents. They watched him as he passed, whispering, "Golden Eyes." He didn't much care for the name. Ibarra was the name of his family, and he bore it proudly. He was one of the few who could pass it on. Trollocs had seen to that. He shot a glance at a nearby group of the refugees, and they hastily turned back to pounding in tent stakes. As they did, Perrin passed a couple of Two Rivers men, Todd Elkar and Jory Conger. They saw him and saluted, fists to hearts. To them, Perrin Golden Eyes wasn't a person to fear, but one to respect, although they did still whisper about that night he'd spent in Bear Lane's tent. Perrin wished he could escape the shadow of that event. The men were still enthusiastic and energized by their defeat of the Shido, but it hadn't been too long ago that Perrin had felt he wasn't welcome among them. Still, for the moment, these two seemed to have set aside that displeasure. Instead, they saluted. Had they forgotten that Perrin had grown up with them? What of the times when Jory had made sport of Perrin's slow tongue? Or the times when he'd stopped by the forge to brag about which girls he'd managed to steal a kiss from? Perrin just nodded back. No use in digging up the past, not when their allegiance to Perrin Golden Eyes had helped rescue Fail. Though as he left them, his 2 keen ears caught the two of them chatting about the battle. Just a few days passed, and they're part of it. One of them still smelled like blood. He hadn't cleaned his boots. He probably didn't even notice the blood-stained mud. Sometimes, Perrin wondered if his senses weren't actually any better than anyone else's. He took the time to notice things that others ignored. How could they miss that scent of blood, and the crisp air of the mountains to the north? It smelled of home, though they were many leagues from the Two Rivers. If other men took the time to close their eyes and pay attention, would they be able to smell what he did? If they opened those eyes and looked closer at the world around them, would men call their eyes keen as they did Perrin's? No, that was just fancy. His senses were better. His kinship with the wolves had changed him. He hadn't thought of that kinship in a while. He'd been too focused on Fail. But he'd stopped feeling so self-conscious about his eyes. They were part of him. No use grumbling about them. And yet that rage he felt when he fought, that loss of control, it worried him more and more. The first time he'd felt it had been that night so long ago fighting White Cloaks. For a time, Perrin hadn't known if he was a wolf or a man. And now, during one of his recent visits to the Wolf Dream, he'd tried to kill Hopper. In the Wolf Dream, death was final. Perrin had almost lost himself that day. Thinking of it awakened old fears, fears he'd shoved aside. Fears relating to a man behaving like a wolf, locked in a cage. He continued down the pathway to his tent, making some decisions. He'd pursued Fail with determination, avoiding the wolf dream as he'd avoided all of his responsibilities. He'd claimed that nothing else had mattered. But he knew that the truth was much more difficult. He'd focused on Fail because he loved her so much, but in addition, he'd done so because it had been convenient. Her rescue had been an excuse to avoid things like his discomfort with leadership and the blurred truce between himself and the wolf inside of himself. He had rescued Fail, but so many other things were still wrong. The answers might lie in his dreams. It was time to return.
Chapter 18. A Message in Haste. Swan froze, basket of dirty laundry on her hip, the moment she walked into the Aes Sedai camp. It was her own laundry this time. She finally realized that she didn't need to do both hers and Bryn's. Why not let the novices put in some time on her washing? There were certainly enough of them these days. And every one of them crowded the walkway around the pavilion at the center of camp. They stood arm to arm, a wall of white, topped by heads of hair in every natural hue. No ordinary meeting of the hall would have drawn such attention. Something must be going on. Swan set the wicker laundry basket on a stump, then pulled a towel over it. She didn't trust that sky, although it hadn't rained more than the occasional drizzle in the past week. Don't trust a dockmaster's sky. Words to live by. Even if the consequence only meant a basket of wet clothing, soiled at that. She hurried across the dirt road and stepped up onto one of the wooden walkways. The rough boards shifted slightly underfoot and creaked with her footfalls as she hurried towards the pavilion. There was talk of replacing the walkways with something more permanent, perhaps as expensive as paving stones. She reached the backs of the gathered women. The last meeting of the hall that had drawn this level of attention had revealed that Ashaman had bonded sisters, and that the taint itself had been cleansed. Light send that there weren't any surprises of that size waiting. Her nerves were taut enough dealing with Gareth Bloody Bryn, suggesting that she let him teach her how to hold a sword, just in case. She'd never thought that swords were much use. Besides, who ever heard of an Aes Sedai with a weapon, fighting like a crazed Aiel? Honestly, that man. She bullied her way through the novices, annoyed that she had to get their attention in order to make them let her pass. They gave way as soon as they saw a sister passing through them, of course, but they were so distracted that it took work to move them out of the way. She chided a few of them for not being about their duties. Where was Tiana? She should have had these girls back to their chores. If Rand al'Thor himself bloody appeared in camp, the novices should continue their lessons. Finally, near the pavilion flaps, she found the woman she'd expected. Shiriam, as Egwene's keeper, couldn't enter the hall without the Amyrlin, and so she was reduced to waiting outside. It was probably better than stewing back in her tent. The fire-haired woman had lost a fair bit of her plumpness over the previous weeks. She really needed to commission new dresses. Her old ones were beginning to hang on her. Still, she seemed to have regained some calm recently, to be less erratic. Perhaps whatever had been ailing her had passed. She'd always insisted that nothing was wrong in the first place. "Fish guts," Swan grumbled as a novice accidentally elbowed her. Swan glared at the girl, who wilted and scurried away, her family of novices reluctantly following. Swan turned back to Shiriam. "So what is it? Did one of the stable boys turn out to be the King of Tyr?" Shiriam raised an eyebrow. "Elida has traveling." "What?" Swan asked, glancing into the tent. The seats were filled with Aes Sedai, and lanky Ashmanila of the Grey was addressing them. Why hadn't this meeting been sealed to the flame? Shiriam nodded. We found out when Ashmanila was sent to collect from Kandor. Tributes were one of the main sources of income for Egwene's Aes Sedai. For many centuries, each kingdom had sent such donations to Tar Valon. The White Tower no longer relied on that income. It had far better means of sustaining itself, ones that didn't rely on outside generosity. Still, tributes were never turned away, and many of the borderland kingdoms still held to the old ways. Before the White Tower broke, one of Ashmanila's duties had been to keep track of these donations and send monthly thanks on behalf of the Amerlin. The split of the White Tower and the discovery of traveling had made it very easy for Egwene's Aes Sedai to send a delegation and collect tributes in person. The Kandori chief clerk hadn't cared which of the two White Tower sides he supported, so long as the tribute was sent, and had been happy to deliver the money to Ashmanila directly. The siege of Tar Valon had made it simple to siphon this coin away from tributes that might have gone to Elida, instead using them to pay Bryn's soldiers. A very neat twist of fate. But no sea remained calm forever. The chief clerk was quite livid, Ashmanila said in her no-nonsense voice. I already paid your money this month, he told me. I gave it to a woman who came not one day gone. The woman bore a letter from the Amerlin herself, sealed properly, which told me to give the money only to a member of the Red Aja. This doesn't say for certain Elida has traveling, Ramonda noted from inside the tent. The Red Sister could have gotten to Kandor by other means. Ashmanila shook her head. They saw a gateway made. The chief clerk discovered an accounting error and sent a scribe out after Elida's delegation to give them a few extra coins. The man described what he saw perfectly. The horses were riding through a black hole in the air. It stunned him so deeply that he called for the guard. But by then, Elida's people were already gone. I interrogated him myself. I dislike trusting the word of one man, said Moria, sitting near the front of the group. The chief clerk described in detail the woman who took the money from him, Ashmanila said. I am confident that it was Nasita. Perhaps we could discover if she is in the tower. That would give us further proof. Others raised objections, but Swan ceased to listen closely. Perhaps this was a very clever ruse intended to distract them, but they couldn't take that chance. Light. Was she the only one with a head on her shoulders? She grabbed the nearest novice, a mousy girl who was probably older than she looked. She'd have to be, since she looked no older than 9. I need a courier, Swan informed her. Fetch one of the messengers Lord Bryn left at the camp for running news to him. Quickly! The girl yelped, dashing away. What was that about? Shiriam asked. Saving our lives, Swan said, glaring at the crowding novices. All right, she growled. Enough gawking. If your classes are postponed because of this fiasco, then find some work to do. Any novice still standing on this walkway in 10 seconds will find herself doing penance until she can't count straight. That initiated a mass exodus of white, the families of women bustling away with hurried steps. In moments, only the small group of accepted remained, along with Shiriam and Swan. The accepted cringed when Swan glanced at them, but she said nothing. Part of the privilege of being an accepted was increased freedom. Besides, as long as Swan could move without bumping someone, she was satisfied. Why wasn't this meeting sealed to the flame in the first place? She asked Shiriam. I don't know, Shiriam admitted, glancing into the large tent. It's daunting news if it's true. This was bound to occur eventually, Swan said, though she was nowhere near that calm on the inside. News of traveling has to be spreading. What happened? She thought. They didn't break Egwene, did they? Light said it wasn't her or Lyanna who was forced to give up this secret. Bayanin. It had to be her. Burn it all. She shook her head. Light send that we can keep traveling secret from the Shonchan. When they do assault the White Tower, we'll want at least that advantage. Shiriam eyed her, skepticism showing. Most of the sisters didn't believe Egwene's dreaming of the attack. Fools. They wanted to catch the fish, but didn't want to gut it. You didn't raise a woman to Amerlin, then treat her warnings lightly. Swan waited impatiently, tapping her foot, listening to the conversation inside the tent. Just as she was beginning to wonder if she'd need to send another novice, one of Bryn's couriers trotted up to the tent on horseback. The ill-tempered brute he was riding was midnight black, with white just above the hooves, and it snorted at Swan as the rider pulled up short, wearing a neat uniform and close-cropped brown hair. Did he have to bring that creature with him? Aes Sedai? The man asked, bowing to her from horseback. You have a message for Lord Bryn? Yes, Swan said, and you'll see it delivered with all haste. You understand me? All of our lives could depend on it. The soldier nodded sharply. Tell Lord Bryn, Swan began. Tell him to watch his flanks. Our enemy has been taught the method we used to get here. It shall be done. Repeat it back to me, Swan said. Of course, Aes Sedai, the slender man said, bowing again. Just so you know, I have been a messenger in the General's command for over a decade. My memory Stop, Swan interrupted. I don't care how long you've been doing this. I don't care how good your memory is. I don't care if by some twist of fate you've been asked to run this very same message 1,000 times before. You will repeat it back to me. Yes, Aes Sedai. I'm to tell the Lord General to watch his flanks. Our enemy has been taught the method we used to get here. Good, go. The man nodded. Now. He reared that awful horse and galloped out of the camp, cloak flapping behind him. What was that about? Shiriam asked, glancing away from the proceedings inside the hall. Making certain we don't wake up with Elida's army surrounding us, Swan said. I'll bet I'm the only one who thought to warn our general that the enemy may have just undone our biggest tactical advantage. So much for a siege. Shiriam frowned as if she hadn't considered that. She wouldn't be alone. Oh, some would think of Bryn and would be planning to send word to the general eventually. But for many, the catastrophe here wasn't the fact that Elida could now move her armies to flank them, or that now Bryn's siege was useless. The catastrophe would be more personal for them. The knowledge they'd worked to keep secret had fallen into the hands of others. Traveling was theirs, and now Elida had it. Very Aes Sedai. Indignation first, implication second. Or perhaps Swan was just feeling bitter. Someone inside the tent finally thought for the meeting to be sealed to the flame, and so Swan withdrew, stepping off the walkway and onto the hard-packed earth. Novices scuttled this way and that, heads bowed to avoid her eyes, though they were quick to curtsy. I haven't been doing a very good job of acting weak today, Swan thought with a grimace. The White Tower was crumbling. The Ajahs weakened one another with heavy infighting. Even here in Egwene's camp, more time was spent politicking than preparing for the coming storm. And Swan was partially responsible for those failures. Elida and her Ajah certainly bore the lionfish's share of the blame. But would the tower have split in the first place if Swan had fostered cooperation between the Ajahs? Elida hadn't had that long to work. Every rift that appeared in the tower could likely be traced back to tiny cracks during Swan's tenure as Amelin. If she'd been more of a mediator among the factions of the White Tower, could she have pounded strength into the bones of these women? Could she have kept them from turning on one another like razorfish in a blood frenzy? The Dragon Reborn was important, but he was only one figure in the weaving of these final days. It was too easy to forget that. Too easy to watch the dramatic figure of legend and forget everyone else. She sighed, picking up her laundry, and, out of habit, checking to make certain everything was there. As she did so, a figure in white approached her from one of the branching pathways. Swan Sedai? Swan looked up, frowning. The novice before her was one of the strangest in the camp. Nearly 70 years old, Sharina had the weathered, creased face of a grandmother. She kept her silver hair up in a bun, and while she walked without a stoop, there was a certain distinct weight to her. She had seen so much, done so much, passed so many years, and unlike an Aes Sedai, Sharina had lived all of those years, working, raising a family, even burying children. She was strong in the power, remarkably so. She would wear the shawl for certain, and as soon as she did, she'd be far above Swan. For now, though, Sharina curtsied deeply. She gave an almost perfect show of deference. Of all the novices, she was known to complain the least, make the least trouble, and study the most assiduously. As a novice, she understood things that most Aes Sedai had never learned, or had forgotten the moment they took the shawl. How to be humble when necessary, how to take a punishment, how to know when you needed to learn rather than pretend you already knew. If only we had a few score more of her, Swan thought, and a few score less Elidas and Ramondas. Yes, child? Swan asked. What is it? I saw you picking up that wash, Swan Sedai, Sharina said, and I thought that perhaps I should carry it for you. Swan hesitated. I wouldn't want you to tire yourself. Sharina raised an eyebrow in a very unnovice-like expression. These old arms carried loads twice that heavy back and forth from the river just last year, Swan Sedai, juggling 3 grandchildren all the way. I think I'll be all right. There was something in her eyes, a hint that her offer was not all it seemed to be. This one was adept at more than just healing weaves, it appeared. Curious, Swan let the aged woman take the basket. They began to walk down the pathway toward the novices' tents. It's curious, Sharina said, that such a large disturbance could be caused by such a seemingly simple revelation, wouldn't you say, Swan Sedai? Elida's discovery of traveling is an important revelation. And yet nowhere near as important as the ones rumored to have come during the meeting a few months back when that man who can channel visited. Odd that this should create such a scene. Swan shook her head. The thinking of crowds is often odd at first consideration, Sharina. Everyone is still talking about that Ashaman visit and they're thirsty for more. So they react with excitement at the chance to hear something else. In that way, the great revelations can come in secret, but then cause lesser ones to be received in an explosion of anxiety. One could put that observation to good use, I should think. Sharina nodded to a group of novices as they passed. If one wanted to cause worry, that is. What are you saying? Swan asked, eyes narrowing. Ashmanila reported first to Lelaine Sedai, Sharina said softly. I've heard that Lelaine was the one who let the news slip. She spoke it out loud in the hearing of a family of novices while calling for the hall to meet. She also deflected several early calls for the meeting to be sealed to the flame. Ah, Swan said. So that's why. I relate only hearsay, of course, Sharina explained, pausing in the shade of a scraggly blackwood tree. It is probably just foolishness. Why, an Aes Sedai of Lelaine's stature would know that if she let information slip in the hearing of novices, it would soon pass to all willing ears. And in the tower, every ear is willing. Exactly, Swan Sedai, Sharina said, smiling. Lelaine had wanted to create a menagerie of a meeting. She'd wanted novices listening in, and every sister in the camp joining in the discussion. Why? And why was Sharina confiding her very unnovice-like opinions? The answer was obvious. The more threatened the women in the camp felt, the more danger they saw from Elida, the easier it would be for a firm hand to seize control. Though the sisters were indignant now over the mere loss of a closely guarded secret, they would soon realize the danger that Swan had already seen. Soon there would be fear, worry, anxiety. The siege would never work, Not now that the Aes Sedai inside it could travel wherever and whenever they wished. Bryn's army at the bridges had become useless. Unless Siuan missed her guess, Lelaine would be making certain that everyone else noticed the implications too. She wants us scared, Siuan said. She wants a crisis. It was clever. Siuan should have seen this coming. The fact that she hadn't, and the fact that she'd gotten no wind of Lelaine's plans, also whispered an important fact. The woman might not trust Siuan as deeply as she seemed to. She focused on Sharina. The gray-haired woman stood patiently,
Hey, how you doing,
waiting
bro?
as Siuan worked through
You know
what she'd revealed.
Just give me 1 second.
Why
I'm
did
going
you
to do a
do
dab.
this? Siuan asked.
Gotta go
For
get
all
my
you know, I'm Lelaine's
other
lackey.
torch.
Sharina raised her eyebrows. Please, Siuan Sedai. These eyes aren't blind, and they see a woman working very hard to keep the Amerlin's enemies occupied. Fine, Siuan said, but you are still exposing yourself for very little reward. Little reward? Sharina asked. Excuse me, Siuan Sedai, but what do you suppose my fate will be if the Amerlin doesn't return? No matter what she says now, we can sense Lelaine Sedai's true opinions. Siuan hesitated. Though Lelaine now played the part of Egwene's pious advocate, not too long ago she had been as displeased as everyone else over the 2 old novices. Few liked it when traditions changed. Now that the new novices had been entered into the novice book, it would be very difficult to put them out of the tower. But that didn't mean the Aes Sedai would continue to let older women in. Beyond that, there was a good chance that Lelaine, or whoever ended up with the Amerlin seat, would find a way to delay or disrupt the progression of the women.
Not done too. My day was okay, I guess.
That would certainly include Sharina. I will let the
I remember I used to
your
work at
actions here,
a
Siuan
Whataburger
said.
when I used to live in
You will be
Albuquerque.
rewarded. My reward will be Egwene Sedai's return, Siuan Sedai. Pray it be swift. She entangled our fate with her own the moment she took us in. After what I've seen and what I've felt, I have no intention of stopping my training. The woman hefted the basket. I assume you wish these washed and returned to you? Yes, thank you. I am a novice, Siuan Sedai. It is my duty and my pleasure. The elderly woman bowed in respect and continued on down the path, walking with a step younger than her years. Siuan watched her go, then stopped
In the shift I had when I used to work at a Whataburger was actually a graveyard shift.
Glancing toward the spire of the White Tower. Sharina isn't the only one whose fate is entangled with yours. You've got us all wound up in that net of yours. Chapter 19. Gambits. Chaos. The entire world was chaos. Tuon stood on the balcony of her audience hall in the palace of Ebu Dar, hands clasped behind her back. In the palace grounds, flagstones washed white, like so many surfaces in the city, a group of Altaran armsmen in gold and black practiced formations beneath the watchful eyes of a pair of her own officers. Beyond them, the city proper rose, white domes banded with fire spreading alongside towering spires. Order. Here in Ebu Dar, there was order, even in the fields of tents and wagons outside the city. Seanchan soldiers patrolled and kept the peace. There were plans to clean out the Rahat. Just because one was poor was not enough or an excuse to live without law. But this city was just a tiny, tiny pocket of order in a world of tempest. Seanchan itself was broken by civil war, now that the Empress had died. The Karen had come, but recapturing these lands of Artur Hawkwing progressed slowly, stalled by the Dragon Reborn in the east and Damani armies in the north. She still waited to hear news of Lieutenant General Turon, but the signs were not good. Galgan maintained that they might be surprised at him, but Tuon had seen a black dove the hour she was informed of Turon's predicament. The omen had been clear. He would not return alive. Chaos. She glanced to the side, where faithful Kharid stood in his thick armor, colored blood red and a deep green, nearly black. He was a tall man, square face nearly as solid as the armor. He had fully 2 watch guards with him this day, the day after
Cheers,
Tuan's
Christopher.
return to Ebu Dar, along with 6 Ogier gardeners, all standing along the walls. They lined the sides of the high-ceilinged, white-pillared room. Kharid sensed the chaos and did not intend to let her be taken down. Chaos was the most deadly when you made assumptions about what it could and couldn't infect. Here in Ebu Dar, it manifested in the form of a faction intent on taking Tuan's own life. She had been dodging assassinations since she could walk, and she had survived them all. She anticipated them. In a way, she thrived because of them. How were you to know that you were powerful unless assassins were sent to kill you? Suroth's betrayal, however. Chaos indeed, when the leader of the Forerunners herself turned traitor. Bringing the world back into order was very, very difficult. Perhaps impossible. Tuan straightened her back. She had not thought to become empress for many years yet, but she would do her duty. She turned away from the balcony and walked back into the audience chamber to face the crowd awaiting her. Like the others of the blood, she wore ashes on her cheeks to mourn the loss of the empress. Tuan had little affection for her mother, but affection was not needed for an empress. She provided order and stability. Tuan had only begun to understand the importance of these things as the weight had settled on her shoulders. The chamber was wide and rectangular, lit with candelabras between the pillars and the radiant glow of sunlight through the wide balcony beyond. Tuan had ordered the room's rugs removed, preferring the bright white tiles. The ceiling bore a painted mural of fishers at sea, with gulls in the clear air, and the walls were a soft blue. A group of 10 Dako Vale knelt before the candelabras to Tuan's right. They wore filmy costumes, waiting for a command. Suroth was the Death Watch guard saw to her. Her hair grew out. As soon as Tuan entered the room, all of the commoners bowed on knees with foreheads to the ground. Those of the blood knelt, bowing their heads. Across from the Dako Vale, on the other side of the hall, Lanella and Melatine knelt in dresses emblazoned with silver lightning bolts in red panels on their skirts. Their leashed damani knelt face down. Tuan's kidnapping had been unbearable to several of the damani. They had taken to inconsolable weeping during her absence. Her audience chair was relatively simple, a wooden seat with black velvet on the arms and back. She sat down, wearing a pleated gown of the deepest sea blue, a white cape fluttering behind her. As soon as she did, the people in the room rose from their positions of adulation, all save the Dako Vale, who remained kneeling. Selucia stood and stepped up beside the chair, her golden hair in a braid down her right side, the left side of her head shaven. She did not wear the ashes, since she was not of the blood, but the white band on her arm indicated that she, like the entire empire, mourned the loss of her. Zero, Tuan's secretary, and secretly her hand, stepped up to the other side of the chair. The Death Watch guards moved in subtly around her, dark armor glittering faintly in the sunlight. They had been particularly protective of her lately. She didn't blame them, recent events considered. Here I am, Tuan thought, surrounded by my might, Damani on one side and Death Watch guard on the other, and yet I feel no safer than I did with Matrim. How odd that she should have felt safe with him. Directly in front of her, lit by indirect sunlight from the open balcony behind, was a collection of the blood, Captain General Galgan highest of them. He wore armor this day, the breastplate painted a deep blue, nearly dark enough to be black. His powdery white hair ran in a crest, with the sides of his head shaven, and was plaited to his shoulders, for he was of the high blood. With him were 2 members of the low blood, Banner General Najira and Banner General Yamada, and several commoner officers. They waited patiently, carefully not meeting Tuan's eyes. A gathering of other members of the Blood stood several steps behind to witness her acts. Wiry Faverda Nofish and long-faced Amenar Shumada led them. They were both important enough to be dangerous. Suroth wouldn't be the only one who saw opportunity in these times. If Tuon were to fall, practically anyone could become empress or emperor. The war in Seanchan would not end quickly, but when it did, the victor would undoubtedly raise him or herself to the Crystal Throne as well. And then there would be two leaders of the Seanchan Empire, divided by an ocean, united in desire to conquer one another. Neither could allow the other to live. Order, Tuon thought, tapping the black wood of her armrest with a blue lacquered fingernail. Order must emanate from me. I will bring the calm airs to those beset by storms. Selucia is my truth speaker, she announced to the room. Let it be published among the Blood. The statement was expected. Selucia bowed her head in acceptance, though she had no desire for any appointment other than to serve and protect Tuon. She would not welcome this position, but she was also honest and straightforward. She would make an excellent At least this time, Tuon could be certain that her truth speaker wasn't one of the Forsaken. Did she believe Falendra's story, then? It stretched plausibility. It sounded like one of Matrim's fanciful tales of imaginary creatures that lurked in the dark. And yet the other Suldam and Damani had corroborated Falendra's tale. Some facts, at least, seemed straightforward. Anaf had been working with Suroth. Suroth, after some persuasion, had admitted that she had met with one of the Forsaken, or at least she thought she had. She hadn't known that the Forsaken was the same as Anaf, but she seemed to find the revelation believable. Whether or not she really was Forsaken, Anaf had met with the Dragon Reborn, imitating Tuon, and had then tried to kill him. Order, Tuon thought, keeping her face still. I represent order. Tuon gestured rapidly to Selucia, who was still Tuon's voice and her shadow, even with the added responsibility of truth speaker. When ordering those far beneath herself, Tuon would first pass the words to Selucia, who would speak them. You are required to send him in, Selucia said to a Daco Vale beside the throne. He bowed himself to the ground, touching head to the floor, then hurried to the other end of the large room and opened the door. Beslan, king of Altara and high seat of House Mitzabar, was a slender youth with black eyes and hair. He had the olive skin common to the Altaran people, but had taken to wearing clothing like that favored by the Blood. Loose trousers of yellow and a high-collared coat that came down only to the middle of his chest, a yellow shirt underneath. The Blood had left a clear passage down the middle of the room, and Beslan walked through it, eyes lowered. Upon reaching the supplication space before the throne, he went down on his knees, then bowed low. The perfect image of a loyal subject, except for the thin golden crown on his head. Tuon gestured to Selucia. You are bidden to rise, Selucia said. Beslan rose, though he kept his gaze averted. He was a fine actor. The daughter of the Nine Moons expresses her condolences to you for your loss, Selucia said to him. I give the same to her for her loss, he said. My grief is but a candle to the great fire felt by the Seanchan people. He was too servile. He was a king. He was not required to bow himself so far. He was the equal of many of the Blood. She could almost have believed he was just being submissive before the woman who would soon become empress. But she knew too much of his temperament, through both spies and hearsay. The daughter of the Nine Moons wishes to know the reason you have ceased holding court, Selucia said, watching Tuon's hands move. She finds it distressing that your people cannot have audience with their king. Your mother's death was as tragic as it was shocking, but your kingdom needs you. Beslan bowed. Please have her know that I did not think it appropriate to elevate myself above her. I am uncertain how to act. I meant no insult.
Are you certain that is the true reason? Selusha voiced. It is not perhaps because you are planning a rebellion against us, and do not have time for your other duties? Beslan looked up sharply, eyes wide. Your Majesty, you need not speak any further lies, child of Tylin, Tuan said directly to him, causing gasps of surprise from the assembled blood. I know of the things you have said to General Habiger and your friend, Lord Malalin. I know of your quiet meetings in the basement of the Three Stars. King Beslan. The room fell silent. Beslan bowed his head for a moment. Then, surprisingly, he rose to his feet and stared her directly in the eyes. She wouldn't have thought the soft-spoken youth had it in him. I will not allow my people to— I would still my tongue if I were you, Tuan interrupted. You stand on sand as it is. Beslan hesitated. She could see the question in his eyes. Wasn't she going to execute him? If I intended to kill you, she thought, you would be dead already and you would never have seen the knife. Shan Shan is in upheaval, Tuan said, regarding him. He appeared shocked at the words. Oh, did you think I would ignore it, Beslan? I am not content to stare at the stars while my empire collapses around me. The truth must be acknowledged. My mother is dead. There is no empress. However, the forces of the Koren are more than sufficient to maintain our positions here on this side of the ocean, Altara included. She leaned forward, trying to project a sense of control, of firmness. Her mother had been able to do so at all times. Tuan did not have her mother yet, but she would need that balance. Others had to feel safer, more secure, simply by entering her presence. In times such as these, Tuan continued, threats of rebellion cannot be tolerated. Many will see opportunity in the Empire's weakness, and their divisive squabbling, if left unchecked, would prove the end of us all. Therefore, I must be firm, very firm, with those who would defy me. Then why, Beslan said, am I still alive? You started planning your rebellion before events in the Empire were made known. He frowned, dumbfounded. You began your rebellion when Suroth led here, Tuan said, and when your mother was still queen. Much has changed since then, Beslan. Very much. In times like these, there is potential for great accomplishment. You must know I have no thirst for power, Beslan said. The freedom of my people is all I desire. I do know it, Tuan said, clasping her hands before her, lacquered nails curling, elbows on the arm of her chair. And that is the other reason you are still alive. You rebel not out of lust for station, but out of sheer ignorance. You are misguided, and that means you can change, should you receive the proper knowledge. He looked at her, confused. Lower your eyes, fool. Don't make me have you strapped for insolence. As if he had heard her thoughts, he averted his eyes, then lowered them. Yes, she had judged correctly regarding this one. How precarious her position was. True, she had armies, but so many of them had been thrown away by Suroth's aggression. All kingdoms on this side of the ocean would need to bow before the Crystal Throne eventually. Each Marath Damani would be leashed. Each king or queen would swear the oaths. But Suroth had pushed too hard, particularly in the fiasco with Turan. 100,000 men lost in one battle. Madness. Tuan needed Altara. She needed Ebou Dar. Beslan was well loved by the people. Putting his head on a pike after the mysterious death of his mother. Well, Tuan would have stability in Ebou Dar, but she would rather not have to leave battlefronts unmanned to accomplish it. Your mother's death is a loss, Tuan said. She was a good woman, a good queen. Beslan's lips tightened. You may speak, Tuan said. Her death is unexplained, he said. The implication was obvious. I do not know if Suroth caused her to be killed, Tuan said, softening her voice. She claims that she did not, but the matter is being investigated. If it turns out that Suroth was behind the death, you and Altara will have an apology from the throne itself. Another gasp from the blood. She silenced them with a glance, then turned back to Beslan. Your mother's loss is a great one. You must know that she was loyal to her oaths. Yes, he said, voice bitter. And she gave up the throne. No, Tuan said curtly. The throne belongs to you. This is the ignorance of which I spoke. You must lead your people. They must have a king. I have neither time nor desire to do your duty for you. You assume that the Sean-Shan elements of your homeland will mean your people lack freedom. That is false. They will be more free, more protected, and more powerful when they accept our rule. I sit above you, but is this so undesirable? With the might of the Empire, you will be able to hold your borders and patrol your lands outside of Abu Dar. You speak of your people? Well, I have ordered something prepared for you. She nodded to the side, where a willowy-limbed Dako Vale stepped forward with a leather satchel. Inside, Tuan said, you will find numbers gathered by my scouts and guard forces. You can see reports of crimes during our occupation here. You will have reports and manifests comparing how the people were before the return and after it. I believe you know what you will find. The Empire is a resource to you, Beslan. A powerful, powerful ally. I will not insult you by offering you thrones you do not want. I will entice you by promising stability, food, and protection for your people, all for the simple price of your loyalty. He hesitantly accepted the satchel. I offer you a choice, Beslan, Tuan said. You may choose execution if you wish. I will not make you Dako Vale. I will let you die with honor, and it will be published that you died because you rejected the oaths and chose not to accept the Sean-Shan. If you wish it, I will allow it. Your people will know that you died in defiance. Or you may choose to serve them better. You may choose to live. If you do so, you will be raised to the high blood. You will step forward and reign as your people need you to do. I promise you that I will not direct the affairs of your people. I will demand resources and men from my armies, as is proper, and your word cannot countermand my own. Aside from that, your power in Altara will be absolute. No blood will have the right to command, harm, or imprison your people without your permission. I will accept and review a list of noble families you feel should be raised to the low blood, and I will raise no fewer than 20 of them. Altara will become the permanent seat of the Empress on this side of the ocean. As such, it will be the most powerful kingdom here. You may choose. She leaned forward, unlacing her fingers. But understand this. If you decide to join with us, you will give me your heart, and not just your words. I will not allow you to ignore your oaths. I have given you this chance because I believe you can be a strong ally, and I think that you were misguided, perhaps by Suroth's twisted webs. You have one day to make your decision. Think well. Your mother thought this to be the best course, and she was a wise woman. The Empire means stability. A rebellion would mean only suffering, starvation, and obscurity. These are not times to be alone, Beslan. As Beslan regarded the satchel in his hands, he bowed in supplication to withdraw, though the motion was jerky, as if he were distracted. You may go, she said to him. He rose, but did not turn to leave. The room fell still as he stared down at his hands and the satchel. She could read his struggle in his expression. A Dako Vale approached to hasten him on his way, as if he had been dismissed. But Tuan raised her hand, stilling the servant. She leaned forward, several members of the blood shuffling their feet as they waited. Beslan just stared at that satchel. Finally, he looked up, eyes determined. And then, surprisingly, he got back down on his knees. I, Beslan of House Mitsobar, pledge my fealty and service to the daughter of the Nine Moons, and through her to the Shanshan Empire, now and for all time, save that she chooses to release me of her own will. My lands and throne are hers, and I yield them to her hand. So I do swear before the light. Tuan let herself smile. Behind Beslan, Captain General Galgan stepped forward, addressing the king. That is not the proper way. Tuan silenced him with a gesture. We demand that this people adopt our ways, General, she said. It is fitting that we accept some of theirs. Not too many of those ways, of course. But she could thank her long conversations with Mistress Anand for allowing her to understand this. The Shanshan had perhaps made a mistake with this people in making them swear Shanshan oaths of obedience. Matrim had sworn those oaths, but ignored them handily when the time came. Yet he had been certain to keep his word to her, and his men had assured her he was a man of honor. How strange that they would be willing to elevate one oath over another. These people were odd. But she would have to understand them in order to rule them, and she would have to rule them to gather strength for her return to Shanshan. Your oath is pleasing to me, King Beslan. I raise you to the high blood, and give you and your house dominance over the kingdom of Altara for now and all time. Your will for the administration and governance of it second only to that of the imperial throne itself. Rise. He stood, legs looking shaky. Are you certain you're not Tavia, my lady? He asked. Because I certainly wasn't expecting to do that when I walked in here. Tavia. These people and their foolish superstitions. I am pleased with you, she said to him. I knew your mother for only a short time, but I did find her quite capable. I would not have enjoyed being forced to execute her only remaining son. He nodded in appreciation. To the side, Selusha covertly signed. That was well handled, unconventional, very delicately done. Tuan felt a warm sense of pride. She turned to the white-haired General Galgan. General, I realize you have been waiting to speak with me, and your patience is to be commended. You may now speak your thoughts. King Beslan, you may withdraw or remain. It is your right to attend any public conferences I have in your kingdom, and you need no permission or invitation to attend. Beslan nodded, bowing but retreating to the side of the room to watch. Thank you, highest daughter, Galgan said reverently, stepping forward. He waved to his Sojin, who stood in the hallway outside. They entered, first prostrating themselves before Tuan, then quickly set up a table and several maps. One servant brought Galgan a bundle, which he carried, approaching Tuan. Karid was at her right shoulder in a moment, Selusha at her left, but Galgan kept a respectful distance. He bowed and unrolled the item on the ground. It was a banner of red, bearing a circle in the center, split by a sinuous line. One half of the circle was black, the other white. What is it? Tuan asked, leaning forward. The banner of the Dragon Reborn, Galgan said. He sent it with a messenger, asking yet again for a meeting. He glanced up, not meeting her eyes, but showing a thoughtful, concerned face. This morning when I arose, Tuan said, I saw a pattern like 3 towers in the sky and a hawk high in the air passing between them. The various members of the blood in the room nodded appreciatively. Only Beslan seemed confused. How did these people live, not knowing the omens? Had they no desire to understand the visions of fate the pattern was giving them? The hawk and 3 towers were an omen of difficult choices to come. They indicated that boldness would be needed. What are your thoughts on the Dragon Reborn's request for a meeting? Tuan asked Galgan. Perhaps it would be unwise to meet with this man, highest daughter, I am not certain of his claims to his title. Beyond this question, does the Empire not have other concerns at this time? You wonder why our forces have not retreated, Tuan said. Why we have not struck out for Shanshan to secure the throne. He bowed his head. I trust your wisdom, highest daughter. This is the Dragon Reborn, Tuan said, and not just an impostor. I am convinced of it. He must bow before the Crystal Throne before the last battle can begin, and so we must stay. It is not an accident that the return happened now. We are needed here, more than we are needed, unfortunately, in our homeland. Galgan nodded slowly. He agreed with her on not retreating to Shanshan. He had simply assumed it would be what she wished. In declaring they would stay, she had earned his respect. Not that he wouldn't still consider seizing the throne for himself. A man could not hold his position without a great deal of ambition. However, he was known to be a prudent man as well as an ambitious one. He would not strike unless he was convinced it was for the best. He would have to believe that he had a strong potential for success, and that removing Tuan would be better for the Empire. That was the difference between an ambitious fool and an ambitious wise man. The latter understood that killing someone was only the beginning. Taking Tuan's life and assuming the throne himself would gain him nothing if it alienated the rest of the blood. He walked to his table with maps. If you wish to continue to prosecute the war, highest daughter, permit me to explain the condition of your army. One of our most ambitious plans is being organized by Lieutenant General Yulan. Galgan gestured to the assembled officers, and a short, dark-skinned man of the low blood stepped forward. He wore a black wig to hide his baldness, and he approached and knelt before Tuan, bowing. You are commanded to rise and speak, General, Selusha voiced. The highest daughter should know my thanks, Yulan said, rising. At the map table, he gestured for several aides to hold up a map so that Tuan could see. Aside from setbacks in Arad Doman, the process of reclaim...
All right, everyone. We got to call into this stream for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who continues to stop by. I definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone, y'all stay safe out there.